Today we are going to finish reading Ramona Quimby, age 8. We read the first part of chapter 9, and today we are going to finish reading chapter 9. While Ramona worried, the house was silent, except for the sound of rain and the scratch of her father's pencil. The smoking log settled in the fireplace, sending up a few feeble sparks. The day grew darker. Ramona was beginning to feel hungry, but there was no comfortable bustle of cooking in the kitchen. Suddenly, Mr. Quimby slammed shut his book and threw down his pencil so hard it bounced onto the floor. Ramona sat up. Now what was wrong? "Come on, everybody," said her father. "Get cleaned up. Let's stop this grumbling around. We are going out for dinner, and we are going to smile and be pleasant if it kills us. That's an order." The girls stared at their father and then at one another. What was going on? They had not gone out to dinner for months, so how could they afford to go now? "To the Whopper Burger?" asked Ramona. "Sure," said Mr. Quimby, who appeared cheerful for the first time that day. "Why not? The sky's the limit." Mrs. Quimby came into the living room with a handful of stamped envelopes. "But Bob," she began. "Now don't worry," her husband said. "We'll manage. During Thanksgiving, I'll be putting in more hours in the warehouse and getting more overtime. There's no reason why we can't have a treat once in a while. And the Whopper Burger isn't exactly your 4-star gourmet restaurant." Ramona was afraid her mother might give a lecture on the evils of junk food, but she did not. Gloom and anger were forgotten. Clothes were changed, hair combed, Picky was shut in the basement, and the family was on its way in the old car with the new transmission that never balked at backing down the driveway. Off the Quimbys sped to the nearest Whopper Burger, where they discovered other families must have wanted to get out of the house on a rainy day, for the restaurant was crowded and they had to wait for a table. There were enough chairs for the grown-ups and Beezus, but Ramona, who had the youngest legs, had to stand up. She amused herself by punching the buttons on the cigarette machine in time to the music, which was playing "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree." She even danced a little to the music, and when the tune came to an end, she turned around and found herself face to face with an old man with neatly trimmed gray hair and a mustache that turned up at the ends. He was dressed as if everything he wore, a flowered shirt, striped tie, tweed coat, and plaid slacks, had come from different stores or from a rummage sale, except that the crease in his trousers was sharp and his shoes were shined. The old man, whose back was very straight, saluted Ramona as if she were a soldier and said, "Well, young lady, have you been good to your mother?" Ramona was stunned. She felt her face turn red to the tips of her ears. She did not know how to answer such a question. Had she been good to her mother? Well, not always. But why was this stranger asking? It was none of his business. He had no right to ask such a question. Ramona looked to her parents for help and discovered they were waiting with amusement for her answer. So were the rest of the people who were waiting for tables. Ramona scowled at the man. She did not have to answer him if she did not want to. The hostess saved Ramona by calling out, "Quimby, party of 4," and leading the family to a plastic upholstered booth. "Why didn't you answer the man?" Beezus was amused as everyone else. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," was Ramona's dignified answer. "But Mother and Daddy are with us," Beezus pointed out, rather meanly, Ramona thought. "Remember," said Mr. Quimby, as he opened his menu, "we are all going to smile and enjoy ourselves if it kills us." As Ramona picked up her menu, she was still seething inside. Maybe she hadn't always been good to her mother, but that man had no right to pry. When she discovered he was seated in a single booth across the aisle, she gave him an indignant look, which he answered with a merry wink. So he had been teasing. Well, Ramona didn't like it. When Ramona opened her menu, she made an exciting discovery. She no longer had to depend on colored pictures of hamburgers, french fries, chili, and steak to help her make up her mind. She could now read what was offered. She studied carefully, and when she came to the bottom of the menu, she read the dreaded words, "Child's plate for children under 12. Then came the list of choices. Fish sticks, chicken drumsticks, hot dogs, none of them to Ramona for food for a treat. They were food for a school cafeteria. "Daddy," Ramona whispered, "do I have to have a child's plate?" "Not if you don't want to." Her father's smile was understanding. Ramona ordered the smallest adult item on the menu. Whopper Burger was noted for fast service, and in a few minutes the waitress set down the Quimbys' dinners. A hamburger and french fries for Ramona, a cheeseburger and french fries for Beezus and her mother, and hamburgers with chili for her father. Ramona bit into her hamburger. Bliss. Warm, soft, juicy, tart with relish. Juice dribbled down her chin. She noticed her mother start to say something and change her mind. Ramona caught the dribble with her paper napkin before it reached her collar. The french fries, crisp on the outside, mealy on the inside, tasted better than anything Ramona had ever eaten. The family ate in companionable silence for a few moments until the edge was taken off their hunger. A little change once in a while does make a difference, said Mrs. Quimby. It does us all good. Especially after the way Ramona stopped herself from finishing with, after the way Beezus acted this afternoon. Instead, she sat up straight and smiled. Well, I wasn't the only one who... Beezus also stopped in mid-sentence and smiled. The parents looked stern, but they managed to smile. Suddenly, everyone relaxed and laughed. The old man, Ramona noticed, was eating a steak. She wished her father could afford a steak. As much as she enjoyed her hamburger, Ramona was unable to finish. It was too much. She was happy when her mother did not say, "Someone's eyes are bigger than her stomach." Her father, without commenting on the unfinished hamburger, included her in the orders of apple pie with hot cinnamon sauce and ice cream. Ramona ate what she could, and after watching the ice cream melt into the cinnamon sauce, she glanced over at the old man, who was having a serious discussion with the waitress. She seemed surprised and upset about something. The muzak, conversation of other customers, and the rattle of dishes made eavesdropping impossible. The waitress left. Ramona saw her speak to the manager, who listened and then nodded. For a moment, Ramona thought the man might not have enough money to pay for the steak he had eaten. Apparently he did, however, for after listening to what the waitress had to say, he left a tip under the edge of his plate and picked up his check. To Ramona's embarrassment, he stood up, winked, and saluted her again. Then he left. Ramona did not know what to make of him. She turned back to her family, whose smiles were now genuine rather than determined. The sight of them gave her courage to ask the question that had been nibbling at the back of her mind. "Daddy, you aren't going to be a college dropout, are you?" Mr. Quimby finished a mouthful of pie before he answered. "Nope." Ramona wanted to make sure. "And you won't ever be a checker and come home cross again?" "Well," said her father, "I can't promise I won't come home cross, but if I do, it won't be from standing at the cash register trying to remember 42 price changes in the produce section while a long line of customers, all in a hurry, wait to pay for their groceries." Ramona was reassured. When the waitress descended on the Quimbys to offer the grown-ups a second cup of coffee, Mr. Quimby said, "Check, please." The waitress looked embarrassed. "Well, She hesitated. "This has never happened before, but your meals have already been paid for." The Quimbys looked at her in astonishment. "But who paid for them?" demanded Mr. Quimby. "A lonely gentleman who left a little while ago," answered the waitress. "He must have been the man who sat across the aisle," said Mrs. Quimby. "But why would he pay for our dinners? We never saw him before in our lives." The waitress smiled. "Because he said you are such a nice family, and because he misses his children and grandchildren." She dashed off with her pot of coffee, leaving the Quimbys in surprised, even shocked silence. A nice family? After the way they had behaved on a rainy Sunday? "A mysterious stranger just like in a book," said Beezus. "I never thought I'd meet one." "Poor lonely man," said Mrs. Quimby at last, as Mr. Quimby shoved a tip under his saucer. Still stunned into silence, the family struggled into their wraps and splashed across the parking lot to their car, which started promptly and backed obediently out of its parking space. As the windshield wipers began their rhythmic exercise, the family rode in silence, each thinking of the events that day. "You know," said Mrs. Quimby thoughtfully, as the car left the parking lot and headed down the street, "I think he was right. We are a nice family." "Not all the time," said Ramona, as usual demanding accuracy. "Nobody is nice all the time," answered her father, "or if they are boring." "Not even your parents are nice all the time," added Mrs. Quimby. Ramona secretly agreed, but she had not expected her parents to admit it. Deep down inside, she felt herself was nice all the time, but sometimes on the outside, her niceness sort of, curdled. Then people did not understand how nice she really was. Maybe other people curdled too. "We have our ups and downs," said Mrs. Quimby, "but we manage to get along and we stick together." We are nicer than some families I know, said Beezus. Some families don't even eat dinner together. After a moment, she made a confession. I don't really like sleeping on someone's floor in a sleeping bag. I didn't think you did. Mrs. Quimby reached back and patted Beezus on the knee. That's one reason I said you couldn't go. You didn't want to go, but didn't want to admit it. Ramona snuggled inside her car coat, feeling cozy, enclosed in the car, with the heater breathing warm air on her nice family. She was a member of a nice, sticking together family, and she was old enough to be depended on. So she could ignore, or at least try to ignore, a lot of things. Willa Jean, she would try to read her sustained silent reading books aloud, because Willa Jean was old enough to understand most of them. That should work for a little while. Mrs. Whaley, some things were nice about her, and some were not. Ramona could get along. That man paying for our dinner was sort of like a happy ending, remarked Beezus, as the family, snug in their car, drove through the rain and the dark toward Clickacat Street. A happy ending for today, corrected Ramona. Tomorrow, they would begin all over again. So that was the end of Ramona Quimby, age 8. So, if you want to take an AR quiz on this book, the number is 134, and it is worth 3 whole points. So, 134, and that is worth 3 whole points. I hope you enjoyed Ramona Quimby, age 8. There are a bunch of other Ramona books if you would like to check out some other Ramona books. I loved these books when I was little. These were some of my favorite books to read. I think I probably read every single one of these when I was younger. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you read some more Ramona books, and that is the end of that book.